Welcome back to Math 103. This is video number 11 on voting. Last time we were looking at an example of the monotonicity criterion possibly being violated and possibly not. We had an election in which the instant runoff voting method is applied. We found last time that Claire wins this election. And then we considered what would happen if there were a revote, in which some voters change their ballots. Now notice that these three voters in the last column, these three voters are not changing their ballots. These 17 voters are not changing their ballots. These 16 voters are not changing their ballots. Only these 14 voters are changing their ballots. And the difference involves swapping the locations of Anne and Bob on their ballots. So in the revotes, these 14 voters are moving Bob higher. And when you go and work out what happens in the instant runoff voting method, who is the first one to be eliminated? Well, Anne is eliminated, and because Anne is eliminated, it now comes down to Bob versus Claire, and Bob is the winner of the revotes. Now, we have a scenario in which the winner in the original election has lost the revotes. Does that mean that the monotonicity criterion has been violated? Well, this is a little bit subtle, but the answer is no. The monotonicity criterion has not been violated. Okay, so no, there is no violation. Now, you might wonder, why not? I thought this was exactly the kind of situation in which we said that the monotonicity criterion had been violated. After all, there are some ballots changing, and that causes the overall winner to change. But this kind of ballot change that moves Bob higher on the ballot, the fact that that causes Bob to become the new winner is not surprising. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the voting method. Okay? We can't blame the voting method for the fact that Bob's acquisition of extra support has resulted in his victory. That actually makes perfectly good sense. So there is nothing irrational or unfair about the fact that Bob getting extra supports has resulted in his own victory. So there is no violation here. There were ballot changes, but they would only count as a violation if they had moved Claire higher and resulted in Claire losing. This is not a violation. Last but not least, we arrive at our fourth and final fairness criterion, but first a conceptual warm-up. Suppose that the dessert options at a restaurant are apple pie, chocolate cake, and vanilla ice cream. Okay, so your friend orders the apple pie. A minute goes by, the waitress comes back and says, "We're out of vanilla ice cream. Sorry, that should never have been on the menu in the first place." So the menu should originally just have been apple pie versus chocolate cake. Finding out that there's actually no vanilla ice cream in the house, your friend says, "Well, in that case, I'll have the chocolate cake." Does this seem irrational to you? There is a certain intuition that this behavior is entirely irrational. The ice cream is what we call an irrelevant alternative. In other words, it's an option which wasn't really going to be selected in the first place. It was not something that your friend wanted to order when it was on the menu. So the fact that it's now being removed from the menu should have no effect. It shouldn't change the ultimate choice that your friend makes. Furthermore, if it does change the outcome, that this irrelevant alternative has now been yanked from the menu, then there's something irrational about the decision-making process going on in your friend's mind. At any rate, there is a certain intuition that this is irrational, and this intuition is expressed by the independence of irrelevant alternatives criterion, or simply I.I.A. for short. So the idea here is that decisions should be independent of whether irrelevant alternatives are available as options or not. Right? Your decision of what dessert to have should be independent of whether vanilla ice cream is really on the menu or not, because you don't care about vanilla ice cream in the first place. With that motivation, let's make the official statement now of the independence of irrelevant alternatives criterion. Okay? Here, too, the criterion pertains to a scenario in which there's an election and a revote. But now it's not the ballots that are changing between the first election and the second election. It's the candidates who change. And we will again need to be very careful about the fact that there are only certain specific situations in which this criterion applies at all. Here goes. The independence of irrelevant alternatives criterion. Suppose that an election is held using a specific voting method, a winner is declared. Suppose that for whatever reason there is a revote in which a non-winning choice is removed from the ballot. Right? This is very important. This is the only thing that's changing from election number 1 to election number 2. Someone who was a non-winner the first time around is simply removed from the ballot. Then, what should happen? Then the original winner should remain the winner in the revote. Right? If someone new wins under these circumstances, that's a violation. So just a quick comprehension check before you go on to the next slide. What is the difference between the monotonicity criterion and the I.I.A. criterion? First, what they have in common is that they both pertain to an original vote and a revote, election number 1 and election number 2. For each one of these fairness criteria, there are only specific circumstances in which a change in winner from the original election counts as a violation that is an unfair outcome. So each one involves the statement that the original winner should remain the winner under special circumstances. So what are these specific circumstances that the two criteria are so concerned with? For the monotonicity criterion, the issue is that some ballots have changed in a very specific way, whereas for the I.I.A. criterion, the issue is that the list of candidates has changed in a very specific way. Please go on to the next video.